Hey guys, it's Gary again. If you're looking at the top of the frame, no, we didn't have an earthquake and everything's on its side. I just can't get this. This camera's not really mounted on here, so it's certainly not square. That's for sure. You can tell I'd never be an architect. I'm living in a building that tilts to the left. Anyway, I guess I've been gone for a couple days. Really, since last week, with my sleep schedule, my friend came over, which I mentioned. I've kind of been out of rhythm. I have some ideas for videos, but unfortunately, they require quite a lot of work. Sometimes I'm listening. I have artists that I want to do, and yet I haven't listened to their stuff recently. So I want to give it a good listen before I comment on it, because what I'm noticing is I'm doing videos by artists, and I'm listening to some of the music before I do the videos, and other music of theirs that I'm commenting on I'm very familiar with, so I'm not really re-listening to it before I do the videos. Inevitably what happens, I do the videos, and then I start listening to the albums, and I'm like, oh, I should have said this about this one. Oh, I should have said that about that one. So that's been happening a lot in my videos. I'm constantly missing things. So I'm trying to get better, which means more preparation, which means less videos. So there's a couple people out there that seem to really like watching my videos, which I appreciate. But I don't know, they're so numerous now. I do want to mention too, just to prove how new I really am to YouTube, I didn't know how to pick up my private messages, and the fact is I thought I was getting them, but I wasn't. It was just yesterday. I had to go online and look at YouTube and how to find directions and how to pick up my private messages. And I had messages there that were 2 months old that I never saw because I didn't realize they were there. I don't know why YouTube doesn't have a little mailbox, a little icon for a mailbox that you can just click on for private messages. Why you have to go through the gyrations of menus and stuff like that, unless I'm missing something to pick up these messages. So Rob Paniques 1960 sent me a message 2 months ago, which I asked him to do, and then very rudely I didn't respond to it because I didn't realize it was there. So I do apologize, Rob, if you're watching this, and I did send him a quick message to let him know that I finally saw it. So thankfully there weren't too many messages in there, but I had no idea how to get them, or I thought I was getting them and I wasn't. I thought I was seeing them, and what I was actually viewing, I think, were just the regular comments that people were leaving on my videos. Anyway, I haven't run out of ideas yet, but everything I have is like, I got to spend more time listening to this before I do the videos. So I'm going to probably do a couple shorter, 2 or 3 shorter videos, maybe. Shorter for me. Everybody says this is a long video and it goes on 20 minutes. For me, 20 minutes is barely a television advertisement. But like probably under a half hour, I'm trying to keep it maybe. So I did my musical books recently before doing the Nick Potter video. And along those lines, I thought I would do one today on some DVDs I have. Not all of them, strictly the musical ones. Actually, I have a fairly intensive DVD collection. Not much of it is music. I like obscure television shows, especially British television shows, and I have to buy a lot of DVDs from like England, Amazon in England or whatever, and have a player that'll play them because they don't come out in the US. So I have a lot of thrillers, mysteries, British comedies, all British stuff I'm fanatic about. But to be honest, I don't watch them that often. I only collect them because you can't buy them in the US, so I tend to buy them when I can, or at least when I was working I did, as far as getting these British shows, because I don't know when they're going to be available, and I already have to buy them from overseas. So that's a big chunk of my collection, but in all honesty, the ones that I watch the most are the 5% of my DVDs that I have, maybe, that are videos about musicians. Those are the ones that you can actually watch. You don't have to watch the whole thing through sometimes once you've seen it through. Sometimes you can go to various sections and all that. Obviously, it's not a story like a fiction movie. But my favorite thing in the world, probably to see out of anything, if I could just watch anything, is probably to see musicians create an album in the studio, either in a recording studio or in their own personal studio. One thing I always wanted to see, and I always wanted to, this probably sounds silly, send a message to Edgar Froese, because he was a guy that I think he went into a studio every day. I think it was built into his house. I wanted Edgar to do a video of him creating some of his music in his home and sell it, but I don't honestly know what the potential is for most people who are non-musicians. That's going to be intensely boring, because you're just going to see a guy sitting at nowadays it's mostly computerized, so pretty much at a computer. Maybe you'll get to see a little bit of playing, but it'll be a lot of editing and a lot of things that I think would be boring for people that aren't musicians, unless they're hardcore music fanatics, which is pretty much the people that would be seeing this video anyway. I think they fall into that category even if they don't play. But the general public, even fans of bands that don't play in general, I think they would probably find a studio video boring. Klaus Schulze is still around. I hope he does it. There's plenty of people I would love to see do it. There was a video which, honestly, I forgot to pull here. I wonder if any of you guys have heard it. It has not come out on DVD. Came out on VHS only, which I have. Don Elias and Jack DeJohnette. I want to say this is in the just before the DVD age, so 90-something. They had one called, I believe it's called Talking Drummers, and I think I have watched that DVD, VHS, which I wish were on DVD, probably more times than anything else I've seen in my life. It's only 55 minutes. The company that put it out is an American company that primarily specializes in online lessons and lessons on DVD, so various instruments, stringed instruments specifically, drum kit lessons. They had an instructional DVD and videotape of Jack DeJohnette drum instructions. So they didn't tend to do very much in terms of musicians recording in the studio. But they had this fantastic video called Talking Drummers. I think you can still get it on a videotape. It may be discontinued, but last time I looked, I still saw copies for sale. And I believe it can be downloaded from their site. I'm hesitant to purchase it again at the download price, which is like the price of a full DVD, because if I can't convert it and put it on a DVD, then I don't want it if it's just going to be dumped into my computer. And I'm going to lose it when my computer dies, which could be any day now, because I think you guys have seen the technical problems I've been having with my computer. I think it's old, and the processor's not up to snuff, and that's where I think I'm starting to have problems with it. But if you ever get an opportunity to see Don Elias and Jack DeJohnette, I believe it's called Talking Drummers. It's only 55 minutes. What it is a videotape of just the two of them. So they're both drummers. Jack plays a bit of keyboards on this as well. In a studio in the Woodstock, New York area, which is where Jack lives, right close to that area. Them recording an independent album that oddly never came out. The two of them got an idea just to do an album featuring mainly percussion, but like I said, Jack does play keyboards on it, and it shows the actual recording sessions of the album, and some anecdotes from them, some interviews by the two musicians. You see them in the control room. Tom Marks is the engineer, who, if you're a fan of Jack DeJohnette and you've seen his albums that were not recorded in the usual ECM studios, you'll see there are a bunch of Jack DeJohnette recordings that were recorded in New York State somewhere, not necessarily Woodstock. I think it's right outside Woodstock. And this guy, Tom Marks, who's apparently a very fine engineer, is featured in the video as well. There's this hilarious thing at the end where the two of them are just sitting in like a lounge area outside the recording studio doing a little improvisation on hand drums, and it lasts for, I don't know, like 2 minutes. It's worth the price of the DVD alone, and these guys are just fooling around. They weren't even recording it for the album. Unfortunately, the album never came out, so apparently it was an independent idea that the two of them got. They recorded it. I'm sure it was finished, because this was quite a few years before Don Elias passed away. And there was one brief track that came out on a Jack DeJohnette compilation, not an ECM compilation. I believe it's Golden Beams, which is Jack DeJohnette's own record label. He did a compilation of mostly material taken from the albums he recorded for Golden Beams, his own label, and he stuck this one track on there that was not something previously available or otherwise available, and I ended up buying the compilation only because it had this one track, and I don't know, it's maybe 3.5 minutes of just a drum duet from these sessions, but the full album never came out. I'm a little surprised that Jack didn't release it on his own label. I don't know why. I don't know why. Jack's so busy. The longer this period goes where he doesn't release that album, I think the less likely it is to come out. And I don't know why he didn't release it himself. He probably tried to maybe sell it to ECM, but if they weren't interested, he's got his own label, put it out. Especially with Don Elias not being around anymore. So I've said my piece there. And I will show, I'll show my videotapes in a minute. Just, I don't know how, I am playing my stereo. It seems like the only time my real CD player component stereo gets any use is when I use background music for my videos here. But Terry J. Ripples' After the Rain is playing in the background. Just to select something. And this album is one of those albums that I almost hesitated to put this on because this is one of those albums that even though I've had it since the original vinyl that I bought in the late 70s, I still want to stop and just listen to it. So at any time I could zone out on you guys and just sit there and listen to the music. That's what I'm doing if I stop. So you guys are probably aware of this. This DVD, which I bought, this was the import version, Riptile, Vetus, and Gertu. This is only just under an hour, so it seems like it was a concert that they filmed and they edited down for European television somewhere to an hour's length. This is the PAL version. It came out years ago. I'm trying to look for a date on here. 95, 2001. So it looks like it came out maybe 2001, which I bought it when it was new. And finally, a few years ago, there's an American version. I didn't buy the American version. I'm assuming the American version is not any different, except I think they have a different cover. But this is fantastic. I mean, if you're a fan of Terry J. Ripple at all, Miroslav Vetus, I mean, I'm a fan of all three of these guys. It's almost like they attempted to get the DeJohnette lineup together with the Riptile, Vetus, and DeJohnette, and Jack wasn't available because of his schedule. And this certainly would be a better than great replacement. I love Treelock Gertu, probably because he's so unique in terms of his instrumentation. You can't just point at him and say, yeah, he's a percussionist, he plays some congas and bongas and all, whatever. You know, you never know what instrument he's going to play. I mean, he's a fantastic tabla player, but the other instruments don't necessarily fit in with that whole traditional Indian vibe in terms of the drums that he plays and the other things he chooses to play. He's just so fantastic. And to visually see him play on here, I'm always flabbergasted because the position that he plays in, crouched down, in order to play, he doesn't sit on a drum stool, which I don't understand. He crouches kind of when he plays, and yet at least one of his feet are actually playing a drum, kind of similar to the bass drum technique, but it's not a bass drum. And I don't know how he crouches down for more than 2 minutes in this like cocoon. Like, it's bizarre. It looks entirely incredibly uncomfortable, and just to be in that position for a couple minutes, forget about playing 4 instruments at once. He's got both hands going, he's got both feet going, but he's not even sitting down. So just from a technique point of view, and I love the stuff he does. He's got a bucket of water on stage with him, and he's dipping bells and things like that into it, so the pitch blends on them. Wow, it's incredible. Very shortly after I bought this DVD, I actually copied the audio into my computer so I could just listen to the audio, because it's like I said, visually there's not a whole lot to see. It's great to see these guys, but besides Treelock and the weird positioning he gets in, and just to try to figure out how he's playing all this percussion, it sounds like there's 2 or 3 drummers going on there. How he plays all this percussion physically is very interesting to see. For the most part, you've got Miroslav playing an upright bass and Terry playing electric guitar. Not a visually stunning program. I'm thrilled to be able to see it, but once I've visually seen it a few times, I have more of a desire to hear the music than just see it. So it's really fantastic, and I'm pretty sure it's still in print in the U.S. because it only came out a few years ago. And as tempted as I was to buy a copy that'll play on the, on the standard DVD player, I'm not going to do it now without a job, So should my DVD player ever die, I'm screwed because I have more DVDs from outside America than I do from inside America. So I'd have to get another DVD player that, plays the British stuff, the PAL stuff, whatever. So I highly recommend that if you're a fan of any of those guys. Moving on. Now, there's no real thematic thing. About the closest thing to a thematic thing was me talking about DeJohnette and the fact that he wasn't on that last DVD that I just showed. Here's an interesting, because I'm such a nut about seeing musicians in the studio. Daniel Lanois, who Brian Eno fans will be familiar with him because Brian Eno used Daniel's studio a great deal in the past for some of his albums, including Apollo and certain albums like that. And I read about this DVD, and it's actually Eno does make a guest appearance. There's a brief snippet of a conversation with Daniel and Brian Eno, but very brief. If you're an Eno fan and you're buying it, it would be a waste of money if that's the only reason you're watching it. The reason I bought this is because I'm such a nut about the studio. And there's some stuff in here, and when did this come out? A few years ago now. It's 93 minutes, and I'm not seeing a date on it. It's not real terribly old, but I want to say it was recorded a few years ago. Brian Blade, the fantastic young drummer, is on here. And what a nice guy he is. And I was only slightly familiar with him. I've had this for a couple of years now, I guess. Actually, more than a couple of years. So Brian Blade is a really good player, and I actually, as a result of seeing this, I went online and read a bit about him. I had seen him play with Wayne Shorter's band, and I actually bought a Brian Blade album that he was the leader of his own band, and I was really surprised at the quality of it. Really, a guy that is going to be hopefully like Jack DeJohnette and have a very long career as a band leader. He's a great drummer, but even more so, he's very forward thinking in terms of jazz. Very hard to pigeonhole him or what he's going to do. He's kind of open to working in a few different areas. So you can't say, he plays Wayne Shorter in kind of like an acoustic context. He's a bebop or whatever. But he's wow. And he might not always do things that I like, but that's not even the important thing. Maybe neither does Jack DeJohnette. But Brian, I think, is going to be around a long time, which I didn't. I thought he was just a drummer. The first time I saw him was with Wayne Shorter's band, and I thought, he's a drummer. Never thought the guy was a band leader. Never thought he was a writer. Never really thought he was a conceptualist the way Jack DeJohnette is. But he is, and he's a young guy, so relatively young guy for the jazz world anyway. So he's going to be around. So he's on this DVD. You see Daniel Lanois in the studio playing guitar, playing bass, doing some vocals. Plays steel guitar at one point, or pedal steel guitar, which I really like to watch him do. Some of the music is not my thing. There's I think a jam session. I want to say it's with Brian, but I'm not sure. I think it's a jam with pretty much just drums and guitar, very Jimi Hendrix-like. Daniel Lanois is playing guitar in a very distorted Jimi Hendrix. It's a jam session recorded in the studio. Kind of cool to see. Not necessarily my kind of music, but within the context of seeing it being played live in the studio, it's quite interesting. I definitely didn't skip through it, and I stayed with it, and I would watch that on repeated viewings of the DVD. Some of the vocal songs are not the kind of thing I wouldn't buy an album with that material on it in some cases, and some of them are very kind of deep and sad songs. Daniel Lanois seems like a fairly deep guy, impressive guy. So it's good from the aspect if you really want to see people in the studio, because really what he is, he's a good musician, but really what he is he's like a studio master. And you get to see several different sessions with him, and playing in several different contexts, and some really pretty instrumental music, in addition to the songs and this wild Jimi Hendrix thing that he goes off and does. And it's 93 minutes, and if you can get it at a decent price and you're a fanatic like I am about watching people record in the studio, it's a great DVD. And actually, I just want to say, I'm just going to go for a while here. These aren't all the music DVDs I have. These are definitely the tops of my list. but I have others, and depending on how much I get through, I may or may not show. I think a lot of folks would be aware of the Mellotron movie, Melodrama, because this actually played on, I was surprised, this played on, I want to say, like an HBO or Showtime or Cinemax. This was actually on there. I was kind of surprised. History of the Mellotron. If you're a fanatic about Mellotron music like I am, this isn't that long, and I'm not seeing the running time on here. And this is a few years old now, and I know they interview people like Mike Pinder. They mentioned Goblin on the back here. I don't recall seeing them on here. Refugee, which would be Patrick Moraz's band. Opeth, which is a new band. I really don't have much to say about them. Yes, King Crimson, the Zombies, but I think they're just talking about interviewing an occasional member of these groups, not necessarily seeing long performances. And I don't see a date on here when this came out, but I think a lot of people would be, us synth guys. To me, I love a Hammond B3 or Hammond in general organs, but I think Mellotron is still my favorite instrument, at least in terms of the sounds that came out of the Mellotron, or the Chamberlin, which I think was the other name that was used. It was basically a variation on the same machine. I think they called it, I want to say Chamberlin, yeah. But in terms of having these actual keyboards the way they traditionally worked on, using tapes on a big physical loop, you could definitely see how they would break down and how badly they would go out of tune and everything. That would be a disaster. I can remember reading an interview with Tony Banks where they talked about the Mellotron. He wasn't at all sorry to see the Mellotron go. The sad thing is as soon as he stopped using a Mellotron because synthesizers were evolving, you can hear a big difference in terms of the keyboard sounds on their albums. If you listen to Wind and Wuthering, which was recorded in '76, you'll hear the last real usage of Mellotron in a Genesis album. And it's probably the best sounding Genesis album I've ever heard. Especially Tony's contribution. The orchestra strings are beautiful. There's like an oboe sound that he uses, which is killer. And right after that album, he stopped using it because in '78, the next studio album was, and then there were 3, and the Mellotron was gone. He was still using decent string sounds, but you could definitely tell they were not the same. They were coming from a more modern keyboard. He got the best sound out of any keyboard he used, but in '78 with those new synthesizers, he probably had a better sound than most of the people using them in '78. But the sound was gone for me. That whole orchestra, the depth of the textures were kind of there. The sounds were not, you knew what he was trying to do in terms of musically, in terms of emulate an orchestra in the string section, but they just didn't sound the same from that point on. So that last album, that Wind and Wuthering album, if you listen to something like a Blood on the Rooftops, if you listen to the keyboard sounds in that, I don't know if I've ever heard anything more beautiful in my life. And, C'est la vie, the keyboards are a pain in the ass, and they, a lot of people stopped using them. Nowadays, it's still my favorite keyboard in terms of sounds. They can use those sounds, obviously, in sound banks and samples. The sounds are available. It's just that people don't. Now the problem is you've got infinite sounds, but, you tend to get very kind of trendy with keyboard sounds. And certain keyboard sounds end up being used depending on the year that you're in. Something becomes the hot sound. And one thing that's not the hot sound is a sound that was popular 10 or 15 or 20 or more years ago. Unfortunately, I haven't heard sounds that really beat some of these orchestra sounds that the original Mellotron had, or the Chamberlin, which also used orchestra sounds. Some of the horn sounds, like that, whatever that oboe sound is that Tony Banks used, I haven't really heard again. And the choir sounds on Mellotrons were just absolutely fantastic. People don't seem to use them anymore. That's one of the reasons why when I look for recordings, I tend to look at the time period because I'm really looking for things that would have those sounds in them. So instead of buying somebody's new all synthesizer record kind of thing that was recorded in the last 5 or 10 years or whatever, I end up seeing if I can find something from the 70s, especially the late 70s, because there's much more likelihood that they were going to use Mellotron. And especially, I want to say, I don't know why Goblin, the band, the Italian band, came to mind, but they had some pretty cool keyboard sounds. But so did a million other people. But that Mellotron sound I really miss. So the whole history of the Mellotron, is it dry at times? Yeah, it's dry at times because they go into the financial aspects of the company and who owned the rights to this and who owned the rights to that, and how the salesperson for the original American Mellotron company went over to England and sold the whole concept of the Mellotron to I think he took a Mellotron with him to a British company, which is I think where the Chamberlain comes in. I'm not 100% sure that's the name that they used, but basically said, hey, I created this when he hadn't. He was just a salesman for the company. And so the British started manufacturing these, not knowing that basically they had stolen the rights and the keyboard itself from the American designers. So they go a lot into the financial aspects of the history and what happened and all that. But you do get to see some musicians talking about it, some musicians that are still unknown to me now. But if you're fascinated with the Mellotron, this is definitely worth getting, I think. I was surprised that was ever made. I don't know if did I go into Art Pepper in any of my... my books. When I said my favorite book in the whole world is Art Pepper's autobiography. This Notes from a Jazz Survivor is a DVD. It's kind of like a companion. It was in print for many, many years. It's quite old. It's only 50 minutes. It's quite short. It almost seems like it was made as a something that would play on like a PBS on a public television station, more as a incentive to buy the book, kind of, because they do talk about the book. It's got a 1982 date on it, which is about right, because Art didn't live that long after. And it's a great, for 50 minutes, kind of brief career overview with Art talking about his life. It's quite good because he only survived actually a couple of years after this was made, so it's fairly inclusive. Just like the first edition of the book actually came out a couple of years before Art died, and then the second edition was updated after he died by his wife, Laurie Pepper. This is like the companion to that. You see Art sitting at home, talking about his music career. I was a little surprised I bought this myself because at the time that I bought this was all over PBS for a few years. And the funny thing is, it was on like more than 10 years after it was made, but it just filled an hour nicely, and they would show it at like 2 or 3 in the morning. And I had actually recorded it then, but I just wanted something more permanent. Because I thought there was a good chance that this would go out of print at some point. This is American. So it came out in 1999, this edition. So it took a while for this from the time it was filmed to actually come out on DVD. But I think it was available on videotape prior to that. It's only 50 minutes. Not 100% sure if it's in print. I don't even... Shanahachi, which is, I think I'm pronouncing it correctly, a record company. They put this out, so they do mostly music. Shanahachi, I want to say. I hear people laughing at me now when I can't pronounce these foreign names. But this is definitely worth picking up if you like art at all. It's a great companion to the book. If you do read the book and you like the book, they should have packaged these two together. That would have been a great seller. But I guess the book came out one company and the video came out on another company. But this is one I just like to pop in and see Art's Reminiscence, and it's 50 minutes if you can get it at a decent price. There's some footage of him playing in what was a recent band in the early 80s, a quartet with him of just bass drums, piano, and Art on saxophones. But it's really good, and if you can get it at a decent price, I highly recommend it. Especially if you've read the book. This is already going longer than I thought it would be. Joe Zawinul. It's weird because I say I'm not really a hardcore Joe Zawinul fan, but I have every Weather Report album that ever came out, and a bunch of his solo albums. But again, I was interested in this because this is, I think there's only very, very, very brief snippets of him playing live. This is a biography, just like the title says, a musical portrait. And it's this is American. It's, I'm trying to find, this says it's only 60 minutes, but, and 16 minutes of bonus tracks. It seemed to me like it was longer than that, but I guess 76 minutes overall. You get to see where Joe is living in the U.S. at the time this was recorded, which again, I'm not seeing a date on here. This is not that old. Obviously recorded before he passed away. But this is a good, again, you see Joe at home when he was living in the U.S., I believe in California. There was a club that was named after him that was in Austria, which is where he's originally from, and you see footage of the club, and I believe you see footage of his band playing there, his last band, the Zawinul Syndicate, or whatever he called it. A lot of interviews with him, discussing musical philosophy and stuff like that. It's exactly what I wanted. I mean, because honestly, you could find Weather Report and Zawinul's solo bands performing live all over the place. This is the only place that I'm aware of that has a real portrait, like it says, of him, talking about his music. You get to see his music room at home, which is, that, again, along with in the studio, that's one of the things I want to see. I want to see what he does at home. I want to see him, what's this room where he creates and sits down and writes keyboards, so you see that. He talks about his background. Goes back to his childhood apartment where he lived in Austria, as a matter of fact, too. This is really good. I don't even know. I guess, I came across this accidentally. And even though I'm not necessarily a hardcore fan of the music, he was an interesting guy, and one of those guys, like I said, with a vision. And actually, I think I preferred his early solo albums that he was. God, I can't think of the name of that one. I can picture the album cover. One of the first albums he came out with right around the time of the last couple Weather Report albums, or possibly Dialects. Dialects, which is an album which I quite like. A solo album that's almost entirely Joe and I believe some vocalists. Things like that I appreciate. I like the studio albums where the more he plays and the less guests he has, the better. But Joe was one of those guys with his own musical vision, even if you didn't necessarily like some of the stuff he did. Definitely an interesting guy and a real good, if you're like me and you want to see the creation and these people's background and their thoughts, you don't get that in live performance videos. So, yeah, I highly recommend that. I'm just going to keep going here. Pat Martino. I don't know to what extent people know Pat Martino. Guitarist, USA guitarist, Philadelphia area, Pennsylvania he lives in. It's a fantastic... I had a friend at my last job turn me on to this, and he actually lent me a copy, which is why this is still sealed. He lent me a copy. I was totally unaware of its existence. I think he knew. I don't know if he knew the filmmaker or his guitar teacher. I think his guitar teacher lent him the DVD and said, "Gary, you got to see this." Again, Pat Martino, and fairly recently talking about his life, his musical direction. This is 2008. This is a long one with a lot of extras. It says here, I don't remember the concert footage, but live at Birdland and Ronnie Scott's, some masterclass excerpts of a masterclass that he gave, an interview with Les Paul, Joe Pesci. I don't even remember the Joe Pesci thing. Les Paul interview, Carlos Santana and Pete Townsend talk jazz. I'm assuming that they're talking about Pat Martino. Now, Pat Martino is basically kind of from the mainstream area of jazz guitar, but especially in the late 60s, he kind of experimented a little bit with rocking up things. And if you hear some of his fairly popular albums from the late 60s, they sound kind of dated now because he got away a little bit from that pure jazz sound and started using more of a trebly kind of rock sound. But it's interesting because he experimented, and sometimes it sounds dated, sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. but I have a crap load of CDs by him. And his recent stuff is more in a mainstream vein. Now, he had, I want to say it's a brain aneurysm or something, which is where his story gets really interesting, because he was unable to play for a number of years and had to reteach himself how to play. And if you weren't really paying attention to his career, you never actually missed him. But he had all this crisis happen, where had the brain aneurysm, couldn't play. It apparently took him several years to get back to the point where he could play and relearn the guitar. And when you hear him play now, you would never know. But it goes into that. It goes into his life. You see his home, his whole home area where he lives. I remember a scene in his basement for some reason. It's very, very cool. I don't know, I had to actually give the guy at work money for his guitar teacher to pick this up, a copy for me, which is why this is still sealed, because I watched the copy that was lent to me 3 or 4 times. I was absolutely fascinated by it. It's a great documentary on Pat Martino. And I'm not a hardcore fan. I do have a bunch of his CDs, but again, just seeing the whole creation process and the struggles, and especially, like I said, talking about my books video is, a working musician. Not one of these guys that say, "Oh, I don't feel like working for the next 5 years. I'll just sit on my duff and do nothing." These guys, for the most part, have to work for a living. And Pat Martino falls into that category. So when he has a crisis, it's a crisis like most of us would have to deal with. How am I going to get by? How am I going to get money? I have to get back to work. Will I be able to do what I used to be able to do? And that kind of thing, as well as the creative side to it. I'm not sure if this has become available in recent years. Like I said, this is 2008, and I bought it pretty new. Hopefully the distribution has gotten a bit better on this. It's from a company called 16 Films. And it's got a UK ID on it, but I don't think it's formatted for it's NTSC, so it's formatted for American region. But and if you like Pat at all, even if I didn't like him, I would find this a fascinating interview. I just knew a little bit about his background. Fabulous overview, I mean. But obviously there's a lot of interview in there. Guys, I'm just gonna keep going. Philip Glass. This is actually heavy, and I don't know why it's so heavy. It's that there's 2 DVDs in here and a booklet. Yeah. And I hope the music's not too loud in the background. I could turn it down, but I'd have to go find my remote. Ugh, disc 1. I'm trying to turn so you can see it. And a book. This is, there's hours of stuff on here. It's a 2 DVD set. It says 119 minutes, but okay. I guess the basic documentary on Philip Glass, again, this is not a performance DVD. The basic documentary is 119 minutes, so that's 2 hours. But there's over 3 hours of extras. Because I have watched this whole thing, and I went to go do it a second time, and I'm like, oh, God, like you could sit there a whole day, So you got, 5 hours of stuff on here at least? It's over 3 hours of extras in addition to the 2-hour standard documentary on him. Lots of interviews. You hear his background, his concept, his writing. You see him working on a piece, little snippets of performances. What else? You see his he's got a studio outside the country, and I forget where it is, in another country where he works too, which has got a fantastic view in front of these windows that he can just sit in front of and create music, and I forget where it is. This is really awesome. It wasn't a cheap DVD, produced in 2007, but you come away really liking Philip Glass after seeing this. Like I said, with 5 hours of stuff. I guess you have to price it out. It's probably not incredibly cheap, but it's not ridiculously expensive. And this is one of those things one of those DVDs I would grab if there were a fire kind of thing, along pretty much with all the ones that I'm showing. Yeah, this is fantastic. There's director's commentary, interviews, bonus performances. But it's really the seeing the creation concept and ideas. Wow, fantastic. Yeah, I'm just gonna keep going. I bought two. You folks probably know I'm a Klaus Schulze fan. I bought two Klaus Schulze DVDs. Both of them are live performances with Lisa Gerrard. Actually, to be honest, this is no diss of Lisa. Lisa's a fantastic vocalist, but I have almost no interest in hearing her sing with Klaus Schulze, strictly from the point of view of I'd rather hear Klaus on his own without guests, any guests. I'd rather just hear instrumental music. The reason I bought these is at the time I'm not sure that there were any American available DVDs of just him playing live. But also, I bought these for the extras. Now, of course, I've watched the concerts. Lisa does a fantastic job vocalizing there. I just, she's certainly a quality vocalist, and the fact that she's creating these things on the spot is incredible, and, the music's good, but I would much, much rather see Klaus on his own. The reason I bought these, and also Rheingold, which is another live performance video with Lisa Gerrard, is I bought it for the extras, not knowing what was on the extras. What do I want to see? Just what I'm talking about. Something I haven't really seen, at least in depth, is what I want to see. I want to see Klaus in his studio, in his home, because I know his studio is in his home now, creating an album and writing and being interviewed and all that. And I was hoping that this would be on one of these in the extras, and it really isn't. The first one is a documentary called In the Moog for Love, or Moog for Love. It's about 30-something minutes, and not knowing what it was about, I bought the DVD, and really all it is Klaus and Lisa Gerrard talking a little bit about them setting up the performance, how they met, how they got along, how they... Really, it was inclined toward this music performance. It wasn't like a career, talking about career or inspiration or anything. It's just them talking more about the setup for the concerts that were filmed here. So... say it was a little bit of a bust? No, because it's interesting to see, but it's not what I was hoping would be as one of the special features, which is why I bought it. This one, however, Rheingold, in terms of, again, it's the same thing. Two DVDs. One is the live performance with Lisa, which is, honestly, I can't tell the difference between the two live performances. I'd have to see the stage setup, because they just both escape my mind. I only picture one performance, and they're pretty much alike, plus they were filmed very closely together, so it's not like going back 10 or 12 years later and getting together with all the equipment changes since then. The second one has a much, much, much longer documentary, and this is more like what I was hoping, but not there 100%. But there's two documentaries actually on the second disc, which is really what I like. There's Klaus Schulze at Peter Gabriel's Real World Studios in England. They're doing a 5.1 mix of, I guess it's the 5.1 mix of this live album, or possibly a studio album that he recorded with Lisa Gerrard. I'm not sure. But you see him in the studio after the music's recorded, unfortunately, and the technicians doing a lot of work on the 5.1 mix, and them talking about it and fooling around and stuff like that. It's interesting to see. It's not as good as seeing the creation aspect in the studio, working on the music, creating it and recording it, but you see Klaus and you see him fooling around and talking, and it's fun to see, and you get to see what Peter Gabriel's studios look like inside, which are just incredible. The Real World is a very interesting building, a weird structure. There's even a section where they're sitting outside the studio, right by a pond. There's a pond right by the very large pond right by the studio, and the Klaus gets attacked by a fly at some point, and he's like, "What the hell is it with these British flies? What the hell is that?" And I never thought that flies would be different in Germany than they would be in England, but apparently they are. So some funny stuff in there. So that's good. The primary real thing for me is an interview with Steve Wilson. I'm not really a fan of Steve Wilson's music at all. But if you know Porcupine Tree and all that, not a fan. But Steve Wilson knows very, very well Klaus's music, and it's over an hour. I should have checked to see how long it's. God, what was it? Definitely over an hour interview of just the two of them sitting in a lounge area, and Steve Wilson talking at length about his career, about specific albums, especially the ones that I love, the early albums like Irrelict and like Time Wind and things like that, and Klaus's philosophy. And it's quite good because at least the interview is being done by someone who knows his music. And it's a great, very casual interview, and I could sit and watch it. If they went on for 3 hours, I could watch it. Just Klaus discuss. So this was definitely worth the purchase. Love that interview. I've watched that interview and the Real World Studios mixing thing more than I did the music. And I'm going to show this, and this is interesting if you're a Klaus Schulze fan, Krautrock fan, I should say, really. I do not like Kraftwerk. To me, they're a pop band. I don't get everybody's adoration of them. I saw them on TV when Autobahn first came out and thought, oh, that's kind of neat. Look, there's no real drums, there's no guitar. That's kind of unique. But it was pop music. To me, they're a pop music band, and I don't like their music. So I don't honestly understand a lot of the credit they get. To me, it's a Klaus Schulze, Tangerine Dream, Michael Honeck, people like that were creating the interesting, Cluster, people, Konrad Schnitzler, people like that were the ones really doing the innovative music. To me, Kraftwerk are pop band. So I'm not a fan and never have been. So I almost didn't buy this. And I got to tell you guys, though, that Kraftwerk's name is kind of used on this documentary. This is really an overview of Krautrock. And Kraftwerk is simply the most popular band to come out of there, so they use their name. There's tons of footage of Kraftwerk guys being interviewed, but it's equal. There's Connie Schnitzler. I think Dieter Mobius is on here numerous times talking about the early scene. They talk about Amandul too, I think, on here. And what I didn't get in the two Klaus Schulze videos, you actually see Klaus sitting at home in his studio. Unfortunately, you get a minute of it here, and a minute of it an hour later, and another minute of an hour later. So unfortunately, it's not the kind of long, in-depth thing that I would love to see. Edgar Foressa, unfortunately, isn't interviewed on here. But this is, I think, 3 hours? Yeah, 3 hours. And it's really an overview of Krautrock. A lot of the late Connie Schnitzler being interviewed here, which is wonderful, because he's obscure even to, I don't know, in some cases even to people into the Krautrock scene. Dieter Mobius, is it fantastic. I'll sit through the Kraftwerk stuff, is what they really go into such great historic detail. Actually bore the pants off of anybody not into this. But it's so, I could sit and watch the 3 hours in one sitting and just be like, oh, it's over? This is so fantastically well done. And it's even got some brief, if I'm remembering correctly, and I can't remember where else I would have seen it, some brief footage of Klaus doing some of his 70s concerts, like in 77, 78, like that period. Some early film from that, which I haven't seen anywhere else. Wow, this is good. I almost didn't buy it because of the Kraftwerk thing, and I think it was I think it must have been as a result of reading reviews on it that mentioned what's on here that it was like, oh, I got to get that. And I was not disappointed. This is one of those things that when I go do laundry over my sister's house, because I got nothing on TV there, I bring this with me and I pop this in the DVD player. And, sometimes I can get through the whole thing, and sometimes, watch it in bits and pieces, and you can stop it when I got to go change the laundry and put it in the dryer and stuff like that. This is one of those ones, like the Steve Wilson interview, and close, I could just watch over and over again. I pretty much say that for all of these. I got 3 more. Man, I didn't mean to go this long. ECM fans are going to know this, have their own opinions on the Sound and Silence. Wonderful documentary. I'm highly disappointed in it, only because, understandably, they're focusing on what was going on at ECM Records at the time. A lot of new music, all brilliant musicians, no doubt about that, but not really the jazz stuff, and like none of the musicians that I like. There's a brief glimpse for me. The best thing is seeing Marilyn Mazer in the studio, which you see for about a minute, just doing apparently a solo percussion album. You do see a little bit of Jan Garbarek, but it's in like with an orchestra. Arvo Pärt is in here. Eleni Cannon-Drew, I'm not sure how to pronounce her name. So it's a lot of the more new music stuff. It's all great music. I'm not heavily into it yet at this point. But you're missing. Terry J. Riptle's not in here. Jan Garbarek barely's in here, and it's not one of his own albums. When you see him, that it seems like he's recording. No John Abercrombie, Jack DeJohnette, Eberhard Weber. It seems like it's more of a picture of what was going on at the time that this was filmed, which is understandable, but it's really very few, with the exception of really Arvo Pärt. Not too many of the musicians you really, at least in any depth at all, that you associate with ECM. It's great seeing Manfred. It's great seeing Manfred interviewed, which is what I wanted to see. There's a lot to recommend it. I'm glad I have it. But it's interesting because you could take this documentary and basically do it every 5 years. Since it is a picture of what was going on with ECM at the time, and by the way, it's interesting to see the ECM office building. Man, would I love to work there. I'd go learn German just so I could work there. And I'd move and I'd sell my condo and everything. It's good, but you could do this like every 5 years because it really was a snapshot of what was going on at the time at ECM, and it's not really the classic ECM artists that you would know from the 70s or, the people that have recorded with them since pretty much the label started almost. So you could go 5 years from now when maybe Manfred is involved with another group of musicians and film another documentary just like this and just see what's going on at that time, because it's not so much of a history. There's a little bit of history there of ECM as it is a snapshot of how it was running at the time this was filmed. I'm still thrilled that I have this, but it's just, I remember being disappointed that it didn't have really what I wanted in it. I've seen other people make that comment as well, but it's quite nicely done. I don't know why I didn't buy the Blu-ray, but I don't know. I like the portability of this. I don't know too many people, sadly, with Blu-rays. So when I see something like this, and it's something that, like I said, I might want to take to my sister's house to watch because there's nothing happening on her TV, I stick with standard DVDs. But if they came out with another one, I'd buy it. But as a result of seeing, like I said, to me the best thing in that was Marilyn Mazer. Seeing her in the studio recording an album for ECM, obviously. It seemed like it was one of her solo percussion things because it was just her playing an overdub to some other percussion that she had already recorded. I don't know how I found out about this next DVD, but here is Marilyn Mazer, Queen of Percussion. It's almost, and the weird thing is when I got this, it's like, oh, this is what I wanted the ECM documentary to be. This is not easy to get, by the way. Here on YouTube, I saw a snippet of it, and it's a snippet of, I believe it's her and Jan Garbarek in the studio together, which would have been an ECM recording. Now that I think about it, and I don't know how long this is, and the 71 minutes. That's all. Man, this is another one I can't live without, and this is fairly recent. When did this come out? Everything's in German on here. It looks like German to me. This is not an American DVD, so hopefully anybody interested. It looks like it's Denmark. The snippet that you can find on YouTube, which is I believe of her in the studio with Jan Garbarek. And this is a career overview. So again, it's interviews with her whole history, which is really interesting because she's lived all over. She's had different ensembles. And I got to tell you, some of the musicians, there's a couple snippets of her playing with her own ensemble, which is fairly large depending on, actually, several different snippets of her playing with her ensemble. And sometimes her ensemble is 4 people. Sometimes it's like a gaggle of percussionists. Some other ECM artists in there, and some people that I've never seen before on video, including an American vocalist, Aina Kemenis, I believe is on here somewhere. I've barely seen a couple photos of her, and so some of these musicians that are fairly obscure, you have to pretty much be a really, really hardcore ECM people to know who these people are, including a more recent guitarist whose name escapes me and I can't pronounce it anyway, was part of her band, and he's got an ECM contract now. Younger guy, and he does a lot of technical stuff with the guitar, so he plays sometimes with just electronics. He's on here because he was part of her band. just some fantastic musicians that I've never seen anything more than a couple still photographs of. So you get to see little snippets, not entire performances, but it's mostly her history. I think you see her husband in there and everything. Fascinating thing. It goes by in like 5 minutes. And if you find the snippet, how did I find out about this? I found the snippet on YouTube, like I said. It's the segment that has Jan Garbarek in the studio, I'm fairly sure. And there's a link on the video where the only place to get it is through the filmmaker himself, who made it. And you basically, I think I had to pay him through PayPal, and I was kind of a little hesitant because I think it comes from Sweden. It's definitely from overseas. But it came out to be $20-something, so it wasn't outrageously priced. And I thought, worst case scenario, I don't get the DVD. But I say less than 2 weeks, I got the DVD, and great purchase. Because you're basically sending money to somebody you don't know. But that's the only way I know to get it, because I even went online on sites in the UK, for instance, and I didn't see copies of it there. So I think this is pretty much something. If you type in Marilyn Mazer, Queen of Percussion, you want to get it, I think you'll see it. And honestly, it came faster than some things that get shipped from the U.S. So I can't say enough good things about it. This is really what I wanted the ECM documentary to be. Of course, a little bit different. There's a lot of biographical information, but just a right mixture of, you're showing some live performances. And like I said, seeing some of these musicians that have been, almost in the flesh, that I've listened to for years, and I've never actually seen what they look like outside of 2 or 3 still photographs, is absolutely fascinating. And again, if I had a fire, I'd be grabbing this and running out with it. My last one, and this is what I wish the ECM, again, the ECM would have been even more exactly. I don't even know how I found out about this. Jazz in the Black Forest. This is about the German label MPS. Now, oddly enough, very much like an ECM. Apparently, they started around the same time. They have a lot of European jazz musicians, but they also had, just like ECM, had a lot of American musicians, like George Duke. Some of his most creative albums were actually recorded for MPS. The weird thing is I had a bunch of these MPS albums and just really never paid attention to the record label, didn't know anything about them. Well, MPS, I believe a lot like ECM, has a couple studios that they use. MPS, I believe, had its own studio in the Black Forest, which is where, and I'm not sure if their office was located there or not. Again, MPS was basically the vision of one man who passed away. So the story is so much like Manfred Eicher's story with ECM. That it's really just like another ECM. The problem is, for some reason, despite, like I said, the records coming out in the U.S., they didn't get known like ECM, and they really deserve to. When you see the musicians on there, and a lot of these are musicians that are the extended ECM family. It's the same pool of musicians. As a matter of fact, Wolfgang Downer and Eberhard Weber are sitting together being interviewed in German on this, and it's fascinating to see. I was very saddened to see that this is now out of print, at least in the U.S. I'm not entirely surprised, considering how, I say obscure, but not really known this label is. And it didn't come out that long ago. Again, I'm looking for a date, not finding one. Yeah, and I believe, I'm trying to think of the founder of the label. I want to say, because it's mentioned in here, I think he passed away before the documentary was filmed. So it's a fairly complete, an MPS now, don't know if it exists or if it's one of those labels that got bought out by a larger conglomerate that may keep their records in print, but it's not the label as you know it. Fantastic. Just like, imagine the early days of ECM when they were a bit more eclectic in terms of, having things like the Creative Construction Company and maybe even like a bit of a taste of jazz fusion in there or something like that. And this is a fairly long documentary. Boy, I tell you, I had hopes that this was going to be decent when I got this. And oddly enough, look at it. strange that they would choose George Duke to be on there. And I guess this is the guy that started it. I'm not sure. Man, if you can track down a copy of this, I didn't think to look to see if possibly somebody put this up on YouTube. Very famous for The Engineer. They had, God, who is that? There's some very well-known jazz musicians, also mainstream jazz musicians that recorded from. If you go back to ECM's history, when they had somebody like Mal Waldron originally recording for them, you get the taste for. They did everything on here. Like I said, they had some George Duke albums that were almost like more primarily his solo albums, with him playing alone. I want to say Albert Mangelsdorf and people like that from that area. Wolfgang Downer. I can't remember the guy's name that led a band, fairly well-known big band in jazz. If you know the European, the jazz and rock ensemble that was Barbara Thompson and Eberhard Weber and Charlie Mariano, all those people. A lot of the musicians that were in that band are also associated with this label and made records as leaders or co-leaders or band members. So if you take a look at the personnel in the original jazz and rock ensemble, which is mostly British and German musicians, you'll see, this is another one. Had a Fire, I'm running out with this one. I was very sad to see this go out of print after only a few years, too. This is really done the whole history of the company, tons of interviews with musicians who recorded for them, not just the guys that were recording for them, in the last years, but throughout the history. Some fantastic scenes and just the understanding of how the whole area in Germany, where this label was based out of, seemed to have an effect on the music, the physical place as well. I can't recommend this highly enough. I'd give this 6 stars out of 5. That's fantastic. I should have looked to see if it's available on YouTube maybe. And if it's in a library, just I would say steal it and pay the library whatever they want for it. It's worth it if you ever find it there. Okay, guys, I didn't mean to go this long, but I had those, and those are all extremely well-loved DVDs. I've got others, but they're more casual, enjoyable things. But I really wanted to show those in hopes that anybody who's looking for the kind of things that I'm looking for that might not be aware of a couple of them could go out and seek them. And I needed to do a video, and I have a few ideas, and I was going to make this short, but the next one will be shorter, I promise. Okay, guys, hope everybody's having a great week. And again, sorry, especially to Rob in Boston, because I didn't realize. Like I said, I didn't know how to pick up my my private messages on YouTube until recently. So I got a little tiny package out in the mail to you today. Okay, guys. Hope you're having a great. Oh, and Jeff too. I sent something out to you too. All right, guys. I hope you're having a great week, or whenever you see it, or a great life, or whatever. And I will be back soon. Take care.